Alright guys, welcome back. This is going to be the top 10 worst Magic the Gathering puzzle quest set mechanics ever introduced into the game. Check out the top 10 best if you want to know which ones I like the best, but here are the ones I think are the worst. Number 10, Companion. If your deck meets the condition in the Companion tooltip, your cards in play with the Companion gain the Companion ability described on the card. So, on its surface, it doesn't sound like it's that bad of a mechanic, right? The problem is the deck conditions in a lot of the cards are just really bad. They make you do really weird things just to be able to set off this companion thing. So, for example, you might need to create your deck with cards that have odd base mana costs in them only. It really restricts the scope of your deck building for an effect that really only triggers from one card. It's usually a lot of setup for not enough payoff. So that's why I don't really like Companion. Number 9, Exploit. When a creature with Exploit enters the battlefield, if you placed another creature with this creature's associated Exploit effect is performed. So the reason I don't like this effect is because you pretty much have to replace a creature to be able to trigger it. So you need a lot of different cards that either are creatures themselves or create creatures so that you can replace with it. And a lot of the cards with Exploit are not very strong. They're pretty weak creatures actually, so the effects usually aren't, they're a one-time effect that usually aren't that strong to warrant building around. So a lot of these set mechanics are ones that I feel like aren't worth building around. So Exploit is very much on the weak side for me. Number 8, Reconfigure. This was a set mechanic that was introduced in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. When this card enters the battlefield, oh man, this is one of the most complicated effects. When this card enters the battlefield or when you match the support's gem, if you control less than 3 creatures, create this card's Reconfigure token. So, are you with me so far? Supports with this evergreen will buff this player's first creature only if the player does not control the related configure token. So, if the token that corresponds to this reconfigure card is not on the board, it will buff the player's first creature. Meanwhile, all these tokens possess the reconfigured evergreen. When you cast a creature, if you control 3 creatures, replace this one. So, when you replace that creature basically goes poof. Therefore, support cards with Reconfigure will generate the related tokens if the player has available space on the battlefield. If they can't, the support will buff the player's first creature at the beginning of combat. Also, if either the token or support is destroyed, the related counterpart will be destroyed as well. So, if you replace the token with a different creature, your support goes away as well, which is really stupid because a lot of times that creature is not strong enough to really want to leave on the board, but then when you replace it with a creature that you would rather have that effect, the support goes away. So why not just have a support that has that reconfigure effect without the stupid creature attached to it? So it's just really badly implemented. I mean, it's a cool thing if it didn't have to destroy the support along with the creature. It would be totally fine with me. Like, I would actually probably use those reconfigure cards as a matter of fact. The fact that you have to have the creature and the support on the board at the same time, or else the support disappears, I just really don't like that as an idea. Alright. Pilot. This card may receive effects from vehicle cards with crew equal or lesser than this card's pilot value. I mean, that sounds not that great, even just in theory, but in practice it's even worse. So all the cards with Pilot have that activate gem that every time you pop that activated gem, you have to put Pilot back onto the creature of your choice. And even if you only have one creature, you still have to do it. It's a lot of unnecessary screen touching, which is not something I really like in the game, is just having to touch the screen an unnecessary amount of times. And then a lot of the Pilot cards aren't that strong. I mean, there are a few exceptions, but there's some where you can't cast the Pilot card unless you have somebody to pilot the vehicle with. So to me, the main reason I don't like this mechanic is because it's just a lot of unnecessary extra steps to get it to work, and things are just kind of moving around on the board that don't really have anything that has to do with the utility of the card itself. I don't like having to change the pilot every time I activate, or even less so, I don't like having to repilot the same card over and over again just because I made a swap I wanted. So it's just a really annoying mechanic to me. I know there are a couple of cards that are fairly useful. Our latest set, Streets of New Capenna, have one or two that are pretty good, but it's still a really annoying mechanic to play with, and for the most part, it's not very powerful on its own. Number 6, Escape. So I almost went with Buried, but I think this mechanic has all the worst parts of Buried already built into it. So a card in the graveyard with Escape can only be cast from the graveyard if it has full mana and you have 3 other cards in your graveyard which are exiled when the Escape card is cast. So it's already hard enough to cast cards with Buried from the graveyard. There are only really specific cards that let you do that. There's Corrupted Gems, which are kind of an improved version of Graveyard Gems, which are the other ones that do it. And then there's things like Harness Infinity. There are a couple other cards out there that help fill your graveyard. Turn the Earth is one of the better ones for that. But the fact that it's already hard enough to cast cards with Buried from your graveyard, and you add this extra annoying condition to it, means that it's just really hard to make cards escape. And there aren't that many cards that have really strong effects from triggering their escape anyway. So it's just a really difficult mechanic to build around and make very useful. Number 5, Enhance and Enhanced. When a card with Enhance enters your hand from anywhere, a specified number of normal gems become Enhanced gems. Amount available may vary according to the card's rarity. Matching an Enhanced gem with a swap adds 1 to the first enhanced value of a card in your hand not already at its maximum. Cards which are enhanced gain more powerful effects or lose drawbacks. So the main problem with this mechanic is how hard it actually is to add to its enhanced value of a card. It can only get enhanced by matching it instead of, like, say, Energized Gems, where it doesn't matter how many times you match an Energized Gem, it always gives you the effect of the overload. With Enhance, it only triggers during that one swap. And it also only triggers the enhancement on the first card in your hand with Enhanced. So if you have 5 enhanced cards in your hand and you match the enhanced gem, it only levels up that first enhanced card in your hand. So it's just really hard to enhance your cards in your hand. You have to keep switching them around, and instead of trying to get to the mana that will help you cast this card, you're busy trying to get the enhancement value on all these cards up. And most of them are not that good of cards unless you enhance them. And there are some cards that I like independent of the fact that they are enhanced, such as Baleful Mastery. And there's a few other ones too. Some of the Mastery cards are pretty good. But they would be better if they didn't have enhance. So I feel like this mechanic makes a lot of cards worse than they would be without it. So the only time enhance is okay is when it's a secondary effect that just, enhances the card that you're already going to find utility for without enhancing it. Problem with a lot of the cards is that they're only useful if they're enhanced a certain number of times, and it's really hard to do that. So the idea of it is cool. It's just the execution of it was so bad. All right. Delirium. So this is from one of our first sets, Shadows over Innistrad. An associated effect is triggered if there are 5 or less gems on the board of the specified color, or the card's color if unspecified. So the problem with this mechanic is, in order to trigger Delirium, you have to put it into a deck that, if the Delirium is like green, for instance, it's like the worst color to have Delirium for, because with a green walker, you want a lot of green gems on the board. So having something with Delirium actively works against the whole premise of the deck you're building it for. Like Delirium Black, you want a lot of black gems on the board because it's kind of hard to get a lot of mana generation, generally speaking, for black. So I could see it working okay for tricolor walkers, but I think Delirium would have been so much better if it was an opposing card having, or opposing color to the card that has Delirium on it. So, for example, if what's a good Delirium card actually? What's the name of that black kill spell? But either way, it has Delirium, and so it only triggers when you have less than 5 gems on the board. But Delirium would have been so much better if it was like Delirium White, for example, because you already don't want a lot of white gems on the board most of the time unless you're running white and black. So it would have been a simple change to the way it was implemented, which would make this a much more playable mechanic. But as of now, trying to build around Delirium actually makes your deck much worse. So that's why I don't like Delirium. All right, now we're getting to the worst of the worst. Number 3, Disturb. When you match color gems, the first card of that color with Disturb in your graveyard gains 3 mana. When a card with Disturb is cast from your graveyard, it enters play transformed. So that doesn't sound that bad, right? It's a way of casting a card from your graveyard just by matching whatever color that you need it to cast from. So that's cool, but the problem is all the Disturb cards really suck. The only one that has usefulness outside of one event is Denick, Pious Apprentice, and it's not a good card because it has Disturb. In fact, actually, when it transforms, it loses its actual usefulness in what you would build around with it. So, not only that, but it was super bugged when it first came out. And the bugginess of it, the actual way that it was bugged was that you can actually put more than 3 creatures on the board on your side permanently, as long as they had Disturb. But that caused, as you would imagine, all sorts of problems, and it would lock up the game. So their brilliant solution to that was to make it so that casting a creature with Disturb, you had to replace any creature of your choice on the board. If you didn't, you could not X out of it or refuse to. You had to, as of now, you have to replace a creature that you cast from your graveyard with Disturb if there's already 3 creatures on the board. So not only are most of the cards with Disturb really unplayable to begin with, but when you're forced to play with them, you have to do something that is a workaround for something that they weren't able to fix via programming. So just bad all around, bugged from the beginning, and their fix is, in a lot of ways, just as bad. Number 2, Outcast. So I think this might be the only mechanic in the game that is pretty much a negative. Like, you don't want cards with Outcast on them for the most part. The only time that it actually benefits you is if you're using Chandra Dress to Kill. So, a card with Outcast must be played on the current turn or it will be exiled. When this card is moved to anywhere other than the battlefield, exile it. At the end of this turn, if this card is not exiled, exile it. So, not only, the reason that it's bad is because, so there are a lot of cards like spells that can give any of your other cards Outcast, such as creatures and supports. If Outcast only triggered on spells, it would still be bad, but not as bad, and it would make a little more sense. But if you cast a permanent, such as a creature or support with Outcast, it will disappear. It will be exiled by the end of your turn. If you already have a creature on the board with or support on the board without Outcast, and you cast it or reinforce it with a card that has Outcast, then it's exiled at the end of your turn. So it makes it really unplayable and hard to work with. And there's not a card that actually benefits from having Outcast. It's only a negative. So if there was something that, like, I don't know, if this card with Outcast gets exiled at the end of your turn, I don't know, deal 10 damage to target a opposing creature or whatever, then okay, then there's something you can do with Outcast. It actually benefits you to have it exiled at the end of your turn. But without it, there's no benefit to having Outcast on your cards. It's only something that makes your cards worse. At best, there are cards that give your permanents Outcast, and Outcast doesn't even trigger. So you actually are better off using those cards where Outcast does nothing. So it's a rare feat in this game where there's a mechanic on it that you actively don't want on your card. So that would be Outcast, and that's why it's my number 2 worst mechanic. So how could anything be worse than that? Well, guess what? There is one more that's worse. Ninjutsu. So, first of all, it is complicated as hell, and I'll do my best to explain it as best as I know. I mean, I've used it and tried to play around with it for as little as possible because I hate it so much. When a creature you control with base power of 3 or less deals combat damage to your opponent's planeswalker, if this is the first card with Ninjutsu in your hand, increase this card's Ninjutsu value by 1. Okay, first of all, let's look at that already. Base power of 3 or less. So the only not that bad thing about that is that it has to be the base power. You can buff a creature like a token as much as you want, as long as you don't change the base power. So you can still trigger a buffed up token as long as its base power is 3 or less, and it'll still trigger Ninjutsu. So if this is the first card with Ninjutsu in your hand, increases the card's Ninjutsu value by 1. Right there, you already have to have a pretty weak base power creature, 3 or less, just to trigger the Ninjutsu value. At the beginning of combat during your turn, if this creature's Ninjutsu value is equal or greater than the required value, replace the target creature you control by this. So you have to replace the target creature. We'll get into that a little bit later. I'll explain that a little bit more. So if you already have 3 creatures on the board, you must replace the creature if Ninjutsu is triggered by the new creature. Then this creature gains haste until the end of turn. Return the replaced creature to your hand. So, I mean, that's probably the best part of Ninjutsu, is your creature gaining haste, and then you replace the creature to your hand. So that's, I mean, at least you don't totally lose the creature. But, I don't know, there's so few creatures with Ninjutsu that are actually strong. And the less of a ninjutsu value a card has, the better, because you're getting it out on the board quicker. So I don't know why they made the creatures with the higher rarity value more of a ninjutsu number, because you actually want it to be lower to be more effective. So there's already a design flaw in that. And so here's the explanation that they gave us for having to replace a creature. To better avoid excessive decision-making in Magic puzzle quests, cards in hand with complete ninjutsu value must enter the battlefield at the beginning of combat, substituting another creature. Once they come into play using ninjutsu, the creatures gain haste, so they may attack right away. Okay, so to better avoid excessive decision-making, then why did you build Pilot that way? Because you're making so many excessive decisions in Pilot by having to change the pilot creature around if you want, or you have to keep putting it on to the creature you already wanted it on. So that makes no sense to me. You have to substitute another creature, and that's a terrible reason to make you have to substitute a creature. I want to have the creatures on board that I choose myself. I don't want the computer to force me to change a creature if I don't want to. Once they come into play, the creatures gain haste, so they may attack right away. Well, thanks. I'm still having to replace a creature that I may have put a bunch of buffs on or whatever, and just because it's a new creature, and it's probably a weak creature too, because it's a base power of 3 or less, most likely. Because if I'm building around ninjutsu, I'm going to use cards that trigger it. So relatively weak creatures are going to be the ones that do that. So not only that, but a lot of times I don't think that ninjutsu is even working correctly. Or maybe it is, but it's just working in such a terrible way that it feels like it's bugged. I'm talking about the part here. At the beginning of the combat, if this creature's ninjutsu value is equal or greater than the required value. So I feel like a lot of times I've already had the ninjutsu value equal or greater to that when I enter the combat phase. And it's not triggering. And a lot of times I don't want it to trigger. So I'm actually kind of happy about it not triggering. So it should either be that it can trigger at any point in combat, not just in the beginning. So if my, for example, second creature attacks and it raises the ninjutsu value of my creature to, say it has ninjutsu 3, and it raises the ninjutsu value from 2 to 3 when my second creature attacks, then that would be great if I can put that third creature on the battlefield so it can attack with haste right away. But no, I have to wait until the next turn, which by then I'll probably have enough mana to cast it normally. So I get what they were going for, but it's just so clunky. It almost never seems to work. And when it does it usually in a way that I don't want it to work, where it makes me replace my creature. So it's just so bad all around, and There are a couple of creatures that are just good creatures that have ninjutsu, but they're good independent of it, not because they have ninjutsu. So that's why this is my least favorite mechanic, and I hope that the folks at Octagon retool ninjutsu, although I know they never will. So I hope to never see ninjutsu ever again unless they really change the way it works. All right, guys. Well, I hope that was entertaining for you. That's a little bit cathartic to talk shit on the mechanics that I don't like in this game. And yeah, I hope that it helped you guys either blow off steam or helped you guys have a little bit of confirmation on some thoughts that you may have had. Just like, you know what? Main loop, you are right. I agree with you. That mechanic does suck, and that is a pretty good case for why. All right, guys. See you in the next video.